Hello and welcome to another episode of The Defenders on Sunset TV. And we are going to look at an important issue which is being talked about, but not too loudly, because it's an area of national security that needs to be more urgently addressed than just announcements being made. And this is about increasing India's submarine capabilities and the programs that are in place and the subsequent programs that should be speeded up if India can get anywhere near the projected vision of the Cabinet Committee on Security, which was a 30-year vision that was spelled out in 1999. And we have two hands-on experts on the subject. We have with us the distinguished Mr. Patil, who is the Vice President of Defence Technologies and Future Projects with Larsen & Toubro, a man who will give you the industry perspective. And we have my good friend, Commodore Singh, who is also the President of the Indian Maritime Foundation and a submariner himself. And I believe, Commodore, and I'll start with the first question to you because it's based on a quote that is being attributed to you, that by 2028, 29, we will face a lot of pressure in the Indian Ocean, is what you have once written, on the submarine front, as most of the kilo-class submarines may be out of action. Now, that would be heartening to our adversaries, but that should worry us, particularly in the light of the fact that the Indian Navy's underwater capabilities are being steadily built up. I believe we have 6 new underwater boats which have come into our inventory now, but we are still far from the vision that people like you, who were part of the original blueprint that was laid out, have expected India to have, but it's fallen short. Why?
Well, the genesis of the 30-year plan, which you alluded to earlier, was all about keeping a constant submarine production line going. So that it's not only about the numbers that are available from the operational perspective, it's also about the technical capability, the expertise, the resources, the human resource in the shipyards. So it has to be a continuum of submarine building. You cannot have it in bits and pieces. We lost out all the skills we had. We built 2 submarines in 92 and 94. And then we terminated that program for various political reasons. And then we lost all that expertise and started afresh all over again in 2005, which was the 30-year plan. But unfortunately, we are again at a stage where the 6th boat of the Scorpion class, Project 75, has been launched recently. It will get commissioned next year. And our next program, the P75, is not on the horizon at the moment. It's still under discussion. So again, there will be a gap in our submarine manufacturing capability, which is not a good thing. Firstly, as I said, from the industrial perspective and the technology perspective, and more importantly, as you mentioned, from the operational perspective. Other than the 6 Scorpions, by 2030, we would only have another 4 or 6 boats with us, or maybe 8 boats, all of which will be more than 30 years old. Now, age, notwithstanding how much ever you might modernize these boats, which we are doing, and the Navy has to keep them in good operational fettle, the fact is age does take its toll on these platforms. And 30-year boat is a 30-year-old boat. What is more alarming is that, as you mentioned, is the build-up of the other navies around us. The PLA Navy is building ships at an astonishing pace. They're building 20 to 25 warships a year. And their ultimate aim is to be a major maritime power in the Indian Ocean, where India has remained more or less unchallenged all these years. Not only are they building up their own capability, and that they will have a very potent naval presence, including an aircraft carrier battle group perhaps, by 2027, 28, or maybe latest by 2030 in the Indian Ocean. It is arming our neighbor, Pakistan, with 8 submarines and 4 destroyers within the next 6 to 7 years, which is also a matter of alarm for us, because not only does it give a lot of potency to that country who's always sniping at our heels, but also as a proxy for a dominating Chinese presence in the region to contain India. So That is why it's not only important that we build our conventional submarine capability, which the 38th program referred to, but it's equally important that we build up our SSN capability, the attack submarine, the nuclear attack submarine capability. Now, there too, the CCS has been sort of dragging its feet over the last year and a half. From the time we heard that the design has been approved and they've crossed the first stage, it's been almost 2 years now. The actual program has not yet got CCS approval.
Okay, so I'll come to that because I've got some figures about the PLA-N, which is PLA Navy, and how we need to really get our act together if we're going to go anywhere near to responding to their gigantic agenda, if I may put it. But Mr. Patil, now what seems to me a bit worrisome is that while the P-75 deliveries were delayed, and that's the submarine program, as some people might not know, the P-75I has been having further long delays, and what is more unusual, that the request for information was issued in 2008, and then again in 2020, but the RFP was issued in 2021, and therein again the Ministry of Defence, not getting too much of response, suddenly gives RFP requirements to Mazgan Docks and your company, Larsen and Toubro, and it has been asked to get this thing together with a foreign OEM. Now, foreign OEMs, as I understand, have not been particularly forthcoming to respond to the technology that we are looking for, that is essentially the AIP. Can you explain why?
Maroof, you said it very right. It was 2008 was the first, I would say, RFI. I date back even before. When the 75 happened, 75 India was supposed to be about a year behind that. And this was supposed to have moved in around 2005-06. And at that point in time, the decision makers in Navy had the vision to actually carry both the Indian partners overseas, and we had discussions with, I don't want to name where all and which all countries. So at that point in time, we were almost at a point in time that the clear decision of the 1999 CCS case was 2 lines for conventional submarines. 24 to be built, 6 under 75, 6 under 75 India, and 12 to be built completely indigenously. And this indigenous capability was to be concurrently developed along with the 75 and 75I. Now, we know 75 obviously has happened. There was in 75 never a requirement of specific indigenization. In case of 75 India, it is very clearly stipulated, but yes, 14 years have passed from that day. Multiple times it came to the decision making table, kept on getting delayed. Fact is, thereafter, after the current government was in seat, it was decided that rather than following the conventional process, since we are talking about building this indigenous capability in the long run, there needs to be a new model rather than just a buy and make. Because it's thought that what is so greatly different about buy and make and strategic partnership. In strategic partnership, the thinking was that if we want this capability to happen concurrent to 75 India, there has to be something beyond just an acquisition, and it has to be some amount of capability building so that you are going to be standing on your own feet. This is precisely where the new model was created, so that there is a long-term way of looking at things.
So, if you allow me to move to the next question, because you actually spelled out the question for me, which is that this model of strategic partnership was promulgated to boost indigenous defense production. But we see that not a single project has taken off under this Make in India initiative, for which strategic partnership is also to be a part of. And their reasons could be many. One of them could be that I think we are not spelling out very clearly what we want. Do we want diesel electric submarines? Or as you said, do we want more nuclear subs? That's the first question. Second thing is that some companies have just taken it upon themselves to go along with us, and at an opportune moment, like the Prime Minister's visit to Europe, just before that they announce that they are opting out of the 75I program, when the rumor mills are, somebody whispered in my ear, that they were already out of it. So what is really our choice now? Because ThyssenKrupp also seems to be a shortlisted company, but I don't think now it's in the reckoning. So where are we left with? Is it just with the Russian partner, or do we have the French and the Korean partner? Sorry, the German, Spain and Korean partner. And I have a linked question to it, that could we not have considered, since we have such close ties with France, to do an AUKUS type deal with the French as the Americans and Brits have done with Australia?
Firstly, if you take the 75I program on this AIP issue, there were foreign OEMs. Firstly, the strategic partnership model. This was promulgated in the first time it was promulgated was in the Defence Procurement Procedure 2016. It was a brainchild of Mr. Parker, basically. And it was a very laudable initiative because you wanted to create a sort of a national champion in 4 distinct areas: submarines, tanks, fighter aircraft and helicopters, which were areas where we want to become indigenous and self-reliant.
Yeah.
So it was a very laudable initiative. But you know, even when the first chapter was promulgated, many people did come up with reservations on certain ambiguities that seemed to exist in the chapter. And it was anticipated that if these are not addressed in time, these will become stumbling blocks perhaps at a later date, because there would be questions raised by foreign OEMs on their responsibility, on the cooperation model, on the contractual model. The SPs will have their own issues with the foreign OEMs, with the government. So there was a period of 3 or 4 years when these things could have been sorted. But for whatever reasons, the SP model continued in the same form, and in the DAP 2020, it's practically the same chapter reproduced in DAP 2020, without addressing some of these issues which were brought out at various times by various experts in the field. And I'm not talking of the companies, I'm talking of experts otherwise. You know, ex-Ministry of Defence people who have been associated with procurement, etc. Coming down to the 75I specifically in relation to the strategic partnership model, I think it was again done it was done very well initially. You know, I asked Indian companies who thought they could build submarines. You had very distinct technical gates and financial gates for qualifying them. The 2 best companies did qualify who met all the criteria. So it was not done in a haphazard sort of a manner. The foreign OEMs who we thought had the capability were all identified. They were given EOIs, they responded to that. And then came the RFP, which basically insisted on a proven AIP. That was basically the thing. So that led to 3 of the 5 competitors virtually ruling themselves out of the competition because they did not have a proven fuel cell AIP. DRDO is building its own indigenous AIP.
Short question. Why were we engaging with them? Didn't we know beforehand that they didn't have a proven AIP?
I think it wasn't that we didn't know. We knew who had a proven AIP and who didn't. But I think we wanted to see where they are, what is the stage they are at. Maybe they could offer something in a year or 2. So all those factors must have been considered. I'm not sure what went on behind the thinking. But finally, when the RFP came out, it came out with just proven AIP being one of the criteria, which straight away eliminated the French, the Russians and the Spaniards because their AIPs are not yet proven, and left only the South Koreans and the Germans in the fray. So that was the first sort of gate which eliminated a few participants about a year ago.
Yeah.
So that's why when you mentioned this thing about the French having withdrawn 2 days before the Prime Minister's visit, it took me a little bit by surprise because effectively they were not in the competition for the last year and a half. So what they withdrew from, I'm not too sure. But that notwithstanding, I think the issues now are not so much about a lack of enthusiasm on the part of the foreign participants or a lack of interest. It's more about addressing all the ambiguities that have come up over a period of time. They've all raised certain issues which they feel need to be addressed before they get into the program, because after that, you know, then it becomes a problem later on. Because then we don't want to land up in a position where the program gets stalled somewhere because the irreconcilable differences arise between the partners. So it's better to address everything in the beginning. I think that's at some stage of discussion is going on.
Right.
I hope it will get resolved in a positive manner because we need the 75I sooner rather than later.
Okay.
And if I may just add, you know, we shouldn't act in haste and repent at leisure. Because we feel it's not working, just scrap the thing, go for something stopgap. Because submarines are going to serve the Navy for 30 to 40 years. We can't be hasty in our decision making at this point of time. We need that capability. We must ensure that we do get that capability and do whatever is required to get that capability at the fastest possible.
Okay, great. So I want to take this forward from the industry's perspective with Mr. Patil. My 3 points with reference to the RFP and the AIP, for those who are not familiar with the terms, is request for proposal and air independent propulsion, which essentially allows the submarine to operate for longer times underwater without having to come up again and again to suck air to operate some of its batteries and systems. That much I've understood. Okay. Patil Saab, first question is that if the AIP is something which seems to be a bit of a challenge to many of the companies that were shortlisted, and you will now have to seek a partner from among those who are eliminated from the shortlist, because you have to get an OEM, as I understand the government's directive as of July last year. So, if your choices are narrowed, would you still have to look for 3 bidders and then go forward, or if you're down to only 1 or 2? And what comes to my mind is the case of the Westland helicopters, which became a scandal later. And one of the points was that there weren't enough bidders for the orders that were placed for that. So how do you counter that? And the second question linked with that is it possible that these OEMs that were bringing up this whole issue that AIP is something we have or don't have, is it probably they're hedging for some concessions from India before they give you a technology or a product which we are willing to accept?
Maroof, what you said, first point first, the scenario with respect to the bidding.
Okay.
Since there are only 2 Indian potential strategic partners who will make a bid, and one of those 2 will evolve as finally a strategic partner. When we start looking at it, you can only submit 2 bids. So there's nothing like more than 2.
Okay.
Now these 2 eventually, even if we were to talk to anybody else, only 2 foreign partners would be picked up.
Okay.
Because there are only 2 bids. Ultimately, if I was talking to, let's say, multiple foreign players, eventually I had to take my call and say that we are going to bid with 1.
Okay.
And same thing my competitor would have done. So effectively, when I look at why 2 are left, is it a worry? To my mind, it's not. It's essentially what Kumar Singh very rightly talked about. It's some certain amount of specifics within the conditions, and those obviously are at some point in stage in terms of decision making, and based on that it would move. You also touched upon the indigenous AIP. I must tell you that indigenous AIP with DRDO is being done by Larsen & Toubro.
I believe so.
And we are engaged in it for precisely a decade.
Yeah.
It has met all its technical parameters. The fundamentals we are really talking about is it marinized? The answer is no. You first do a lab model. Lab models exist. Then you do a land-based model. Land-based model today exists. So we know there is nothing in technology that we cannot achieve. But this technology needs to be marine proven, and that's a cycle which will be nothing less than another 5 years. So that's essentially where we are. And to my mind, this is precisely the reason why others were also shortlisted in addition to the 2 who have that proven capability. Because all of us know that each of these 3 players that we talked actually have been having their own AIPs at some stage of development. Now that there is supposed to be a trial done when you go to sea, within 1 year, 2 years, if somebody can come out with it, he is as much in the program. On prima facie, 2021 when the RFP is issued, within next 1.5 to 2 years, the capability could have been proven by only 2 foreign OEMs. Now, with that, if we were to move forward, we essentially have to start looking at, to my mind, whether both or even one of them. Finally, the bids will be submitted by the 2 Indian parties. So there are going to be 2 bids. There is not going to be less than 2 bids. And it's a call which the government has to take at that point in time. Technology maturity, if we look at AIP, is well proven by both. The fundamentals of the Korean technology actually comes out of the same German technology, and it's proven for nearly now 2 decades, and there is nothing uncertain about it. It's been on multiple ships across the world, and at least about 8 countries operate those AIP boats. The next part of the question that you asked was whether we have a scenario of talking to others without an AIP. To my mind, a non-AIP boat is not a question any longer now. It was certainly a choice for us 2 decades back. Today, the kind of a scenario where Navy will find itself, if we were to sit in a given position, we can't be coming out on surface every 3rd day. So today AIP is as much a part of an overall strategy as the highest end of AIP is nuclear power plant.
Yes.
Now, that's essentially where the SSN makes a sense going forward in a long run. But for any coastal kind of a defense, which essentially on our western front, I see very clearly that western front probably will do better off. And this is something one has picked up over 3.5 decades of association with the Navy, that probably this is a sector where a conventional AIP boat actually would be a better asset than an SSN, whereas when it comes to east, when it comes to longer ranges that we need to be talking about, it's an SSN that makes sense.
Okay.
And this is precisely the reason at Parikar's time, when he was the minister, he cut down out of 24 submarines, 6 to be made into SSN and 18 to continue on the conventional. So the last 6 were converted into SSN, and first 6 having already been contracted, next 12 were supposed to be done, 75 India, thereafter one more program, but an indigenous design.
Clearly, Mr. Parikar was a visionary in more ways than one. I had the privilege of interacting with him a couple of times, and I was very impressed with his ability to grasp things very quickly. I want to ask you, Commodore Jai Singh, my next question, actually, he's again has a knack of leading me on to my next question, which is that the Chinese Navy is looking at large number of submarines, which would obviously, as you said, influence events around our waters. We need a reasonably strong submarine element also to not just counter them, but to provide protection to our trading ships. Why submarines for trading ships and not floating boats for trading ships? Please explain. And the second aspect is that if we are going to have SSNs largely, as Mr. Patil said, nuclear subs operating Bay of Bengal up to the Straits of Malacca, that's largely where we are looking at our reach being. Does it completely rule out the use of using nuclear subs in the Arabian Sea area, our western front, though I understood nuclear subs being the ideal platform for second strike?
Let me answer that in 2 parts. Firstly, of course, the PLA Navy. The PLA Navy is not only building up its submarine arm at a rapid pace. They've already got 6 SSNs. They're going to build 6 more. Plus, of course, a strategic platform, which I'm not taking into consideration because that's not really a war-fighting platform.
Yeah.
They're also building conventional submarines at a rapid pace. Now, they are fundamentally constrained in operating in sending submarines across the Indian Ocean because they have to transit through these narrow straits like the Malacca Straits or Lombok or the Sunda. And that has been a constraint with the PLA Navy about deploying submarines in the Indian Ocean because it gives us the ability to track their submarines once they come out of these narrow waters. But the moment they're able to establish a submarine logistic capability. Now they're building a submarine base for the Bangladesh Navy off Cox's Bazar. For 2 Ming class submarines, they don't need a submarine base. Obviously, the intention is strategic.
Yeah.
They've given a Ming class to Myanmar. So now they will be able to position submarines with a base in the Bay of Bengal for their own submarines to come and replenish or undergo minor repairs or whatever it might be.
Interesting.
Similarly, if you go into the Arabian Sea, Girdhar will provide them that facility because Chinese-made Pakistani submarines will be operating there.
Yes.
And Djibouti, they might create some sort of capability subsequently. So effectively, all they have to do is now come into the Indian Ocean. Even if they are tracked in the Indian Ocean initially, they can go to one of these ports and after that they can operate any which way without us knowing where they are. So that gives them a great, it's a great asset for them, creating this sort of infrastructure to support their submarine operations. Also from the surface Navy point of view, China's ultimate aim is maritime dominance. Its global power supremacy is going to be rooted through maritime dominance, as history has proven.
Yeah.
Maritime geography is unfavorable to China. They do not have the ability to be able to dominate global maritime sea lanes operating from their own mainland because South China Sea is very constricted. They need an open ocean space. Indian Ocean provides them that open ocean space to project their power. It's all about power projection. The BRI is one example. They've been able to, they may not have bases, but they will have ports. They will have ports where fundamental logistic support can be given to their Navy. The BRI gives them the ability to control the sea lanes and justify a large PLA Navy presence to protect their own shipping. Djibouti is being developed as a big base. They're extending the jetty to accommodate aircraft carriers. So an aircraft carrier battle group, sooner rather than later, is going to be operating in the Indian Ocean permanently. Gwadar is already a proxy port for them. So they will be able to put a lot of pressure on us in the Western Indian Ocean because 60% of our oil comes out of the Straits of Hormuz. If they can control Gwadar and they control Djibouti, then they can put a lot of pressure on us. And that is where we need the submarines to counter their surface capability also.
So I'm terribly out of time, but Mr. Patil, short answer to my last question. And that is, a lot of our foreign potential partners have been saying that the conditions being placed on them for partnerships are virtually infinite and the obligations are too heavy on them, and that leads to their reluctance in partnership. Your quick response.
I think that's a subject matter under consideration by the ministry. That's all I can say.
So that's diplomatic enough.
Hopefully gets answered or gets addressed.
Thank you very much. I think we've got a fairly good idea about where our submarine projects should be headed and where they're headed. And thanks very much for being on this show, and thank you for watching. Until our next episode, goodbye.